Hey everyone, I'm Adam Kelly. We are really excited to announce that the course that we launched a little while ago, 3D rendered data sets with Blender for beginners, is now going to be launched for free on YouTube. So you will be able to watch all of the videos for free on YouTube. And then if you want the downloadable content for the course, you just have to support us on Patreon. And we want to thank those of you who are already Patreon subscribers. It means so much to us that you have chosen to give us a few dollars to support our work. So we're going to launch this over the course of multiple parts. So keep an eye out for the playlist, and any downloadable content links or links to other resources or whatever else you might need, those will be in the video description. We hope you enjoy. In this video, we're going to start talking about how we can use this same method used for the ABC dataset on a real-world object. So what you're seeing here is a set of photos of a real-world mug of tea. And basically what we did was we took this mug of tea that I decided was fairly easy to 3D model, and we took pictures of the real-world mug from different angles with different levels of tea in it. So we have full, empty, half full, and mostly empty. So our classifier is going to give us an answer of whether it thinks these teacups are empty, mostly empty, full, or half full. And then the rendered images that you can expect to create will look something like this. So this is a 3D modeled mug that I did. I'm providing you with the FBX model. So the idea is whether you create the 3D model yourself, or you download it from a marketplace, or you get it from an artist, something like that, you can bring it into your scene and then work with it. So that's the goal here. So you can see there are some differences. It doesn't look exactly the same as the real tea. It's missing condensation. It's missing little bubbles around the edges. The color is a little different, and that's actually by design. I didn't want it to be too dependent on the color of the tea for making the decision. So that's one of the things that is changed automatically, is it slightly changes the color of the tea. And so that's what we'll be working on. So what we'll do first is open up Blender. I have a new scene here. And then we're going to import our tea mug. So you should be able to find the FBX file as a resource for this course. So download that and then go to File, Import, FBX, and then find the right folder that it's in and import your tmug.fbx. You click Import FBX, and it doesn't look like anything happened, but if you look here on the scene collection, you'll see that the glass mug exists now. And just to prove that, I will click on this and hide it, and you'll see that the mug is here. So it doesn't look like much, and if we switch into rendered view, you'll notice that it doesn't look very good. So we'll have to come in and add materials to this. We're going to need to set up our backdrop. We're going to set up a camera, lighting, all of this, and then of course add some scripting, and that's going to set up this scene so that we can generate our data set. In this video, we're going to set up the backdrop for our scene. So this cube obviously is going to be a problem. If we render it, we won't be able to see the mug inside. So the first thing you can do is click over here to expand this so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to scale it to 0.3. So you can just type in S and then 0.3 and then enter, and that'll make it a scale of 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. And then we can do G, Z, and then we move it up, and it looks like we need to type in 0.3, enter, and that will place it where we need it to be. We're going to do the same thing we did with the letters data set. We're going to go into edit mode, so we'll hit tab, and then we can select the face select, the shortcut for that is 3. You can toggle between these by 1, 2, and 3 keys on your keyboard. And then we're just going to shift select these 3 faces and make sure again that you have the same 3 faces selected as I do. In this case, I have the face that's pointing in the negative X direction and the negative Y direction selected. Hit X to delete, and then we'll click faces. And now we've got this right here. And this is showing up weird, by the way, because I am in viewport shading mode. I'm going to actually switch to material mode just so that it looks a little bit better. You'll see that the materials on this look quite bad in this mode. Okay, so if you remember correctly, the faces were pointing outward for this cube, and in order to make this look as good as it can, we're going to select all these faces and go to Mesh, Normals, Flip. And you can't really see the difference in this case, but if we go to here, we can visualize those normals again and just make sure they're pointing in the direction we want them to be. Okay, so I'll turn that off. Then you can just tab out and we have our backdrop. So this will work just fine. In this video, we will set up the lights for our scene. And because we're in the material preview mode, we're not seeing any actual lighting data. So let's switch into the rendered mode. Click this button, and you'll see the kind of pixelated, weird, not very good looking lighting and shadowing. So first thing we can do right off the bat is switch into cycles. And that's going to at least give us some more realistic looking lighting here. And if you do have GPU compute available to you, I suggest you turn that on because it'll just make the render a little bit faster. So we have a light. If we scroll out, it's up here. It's a point light. If we click right here on the object data properties, we can see that it's a point light. And that means it's just sort of an orb of light that's shining out in all directions, and it's got a pretty high power on it. So ideally, we'd like this to look like what the actual test images are going to look like. And you can see here, we had a sort of a backdrop of a corner with white walls, and then a floor that was white as well. And the shadow is kind of going behind the object. And that's because we had a light box that was shining sort of at it from the front. So the way we're going to simulate that and try to get it to look as close as we can, just so that we don't have to worry about varying the lighting a bunch, we're going to turn this into an area light, which is very much like a light box in how it affects the scene. So go ahead, pick this, and choose area in the little green Object Data Properties tab. And you'll see that if you get closer to it, it's a little square now. And the size of it is 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So let's change that to be 1 meter by 1 meter. And you'll see that this is now a square that is shining down. Well, it's not close enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to move it a lot closer. So if you view from the front, so I just did the number pad 1 key, and I'm just now realizing that for some reason my screencast keys were off, so I'm going to turn that on. Hopefully you didn't miss anything yet. So this needs to be moved. So we're going to select it, hit G, and then I'm going to put it like right here, and I'll zoom in to show you kind of where I'm putting it. Maybe a little bit more like this. And then if I view it from the top with the 7 key, you see it's in the wrong place, so I'm going to move it again, G, to like right probably here. And then if we view it now, well, it looks good, except it's pointing in the wrong direction. So we have to go into the top view, and then we can hit the R key, and that will allow us to rotate it. And now it's pointed down sort of at the scene. It is completely washing out the entire thing because it is so bright. So let's change the power down to about 21 watts. And now that we have our lighting set to a more reasonable value. This looks pretty good. You can see that there is a shadow behind it. It may not be perfect, but it's pretty close. And I think that once we fix the other materials, it's going to look a lot more like the actual test images. And the last thing we will do in terms of lighting is we're going to add a sunlight. So we can go to Add, Light, and we'll pick Sun. And this one's gonna just be a really dim sun. It's just going to try and simulate some of the ambient lighting that you would get in a room that has windows in it. So I'm gonna set the strength of this to like 0.1, maybe even less, a little bit like 0.03 or something, just so that there's some ambient light, but it's not really affecting the scene very much. So now we have these two lights. We have the area light and the sun, and they're in the collection, the default collection. So to keep things organized, we're going to click this button to create a new collection, and we'll call this lights. So you can just double click on it to rename it. And then we will shift select both of these and then drag them into our lights collection. So that'll help us keep things organized. In this video, we're going to set up some materials for our mug and the tea inside of it. So let's take a closer look at this mug. And you'll see that it is currently this white color, and then it's got kind of a yellow color inside of that. So not what we want. We want this to be clear. Both of these should be see-through. So we can start with this outer mug here. Click on the mug and then click on the material properties right here. Then you can go base color, probably leave the same because it's just going to be clear glass. And most of these we're going to leave unchanged. Make sure that your roughness is set to 0. We don't want any amount of roughness on this. I think because the FBX model that I exported had the settings mostly set up, it did bring in the roughness, but what it didn't bring through was the transmission. And that's just because FBX, the file format, does not seem to have great support for shaders like this, so you kind of have to get it as close as you can, and then you fix it once you import it. So what we're going to use is transmission here, and if we bring this all the way up to 1, now our glass is clear. And you can see there's sort of this divot out of here. This is something we can fix. If we go to the View tab here, then the clipping is what's causing this to happen. Basically, there's an imaginary plane that says, well, anything closer to the camera than this line, don't render it. So let's just change this clipping to, instead of being 10 centimeters from the camera, maybe we can make it like 1 centimeter from the camera, 0.01 meters, and then that goes away. So this won't affect the rendering at all. This is purely in this particular view, like the layout view, what the clipping of the camera is. So that should help. So our mug already looks better, but this is looking kind of weird. It's a very opaque liquid. So we can fix this as well. And if we switch into make sure that you've got one of these teas selected. So you're going to have to open up the glass mug, and then you can do either the full, empty, or mostly empty, half full, or full. Doesn't matter. They're all using the same material. And then we're going to put up the transmission on this one as well, all the way to 1. So now we've got this golden color in here, and you can experiment with this just to see what you can do to make this look more like tea. So you might play with some color here. You can lower the saturation a little bit and get it to look generally more like a tea. So you might go for a more reddish, brownish look. We're going to be varying these automatically, so that's what's going to make this color change, but this gives you an idea of what it'll look like. just know that when we change these automatically in script, we're going to keep the hue between 0, which is this like pure red, up to about 0.2, which is getting almost into the green territory, I would say. So I figured anywhere between sort of a reddish tea to a green tea is what we might expect to see. So we just sort of generate a color that's somewhere in between there. And I don't think there's anything else on these materials that didn't get imported, but just know that pretty much the only thing you need to do to make a material be opaque to glass is that you change the transmission. And then the other thing worth mentioning is if you use a new material on this, then Blender defaults the roughness to 0.5, and you'll see that it makes sort of like a almost frosted glass, which it's taking a while to render and make it look good, but that's not what we're going for, because the images that we're going to be trying to simulate look like this. So there's no like frostedness on the glass here. It's a very clear, transparent glass, very smooth. So make sure that your roughness is set to 0 for both of these so that you end up with something that looks like the images that we're going to be training on. And the last thing I'll say is if we were going to train on a variety of glasses, then we probably would want to change the roughness to some degree, because there are some glasses that are more rough like that look, like a beer glass pulled directly out of the fridge or something like that. It'll often have that sort of cloudy look on it, and so it might be helpful to have that. There is one other thing that we want to do to this material to make it look a little bit more like real tea. And if you go into the shading tab, we can do that. So right now we have this principled BSDF shader that's just going directly into material output. If you don't see the use nodes thing checked, make sure that's checked on. What we're going to do is we're going to add a volume absorption node here. So go ahead and select these. Actually, it's probably easier to just select material output and drag this over here. Give ourselves a little more room. And we can probably make sure that we need to make sure that the T is selected, and then I can hit the period to focus in on it. And of course, in this view, it doesn't look like anything. There we go. Can switch into this mode. We want to add a new node here. So we're going to do add, and we're going to click search, and we want the volume absorption. And if we set this down here, we want to change this to like a brownish color. So maybe somewhere around here. And then we can change this to about here. So my values here, I'm looking at my notes really quick. I actually have, for hue, I have 0.074. And then for saturation, I have 0.732. And then for the value, I have 0.569. Okay, so that gives us sort of a brown color. And then we want a density of 3.4. And we can pass this into the volume. And what this will do is make this a little bit more like tea. It's supposed to make it so that it absorbs the light a little bit more. So that hopefully will give us just a slightly more realistic looking tea. You can see if I view it from different angles, it does look different based on the thickness sort of the tea. Now this actually, I will point out, looks weird if you view it from the side. You see this line that goes through it, and if you view it from the top, it looks really dark. We can actually fix that by hiding the half full and mostly empty right now. Because this is in the viewport and this is viewing in the viewport, it does hide it properly. In terms of rendering, those do need to be turned off if you're doing an individual render. And to do that properly, you have to turn on this restriction toggle, and then you can turn off both those things. So now if we render this, this tea should look a little more realistic. Once you're done with the volume absorption, you can switch back into the layout tab. In this video, we're going to view our object with the camera up close, do a test render, and then we're going to talk about how we can move the camera so that it does slightly different views on this object, and so that not all renders are exactly the same viewpoint. So right now, if you hit the 0 on your number pad, or you view cameras, active camera, here I actually undid that, view cameras, active camera, you'll see that this is not by default going to be a very good render. It's off in the distance, it's very far away, it's viewing it from the wrong angle. So we'd like to get a closer look at this. And one way to do that is to select your object. So select the object in the hierarchy or in the scene, move your mouse back into the scene here, and hit the period key on your number pad. The alternative to that is view frame selected. And that's going to just bring you right up close to your object. And I'm going to kind of pan around it or orbit around it. And then I'm going to scroll out a little bit. And then I'm going to use a shortcut key, Control-Alt-0. If you don't have Control-Alt number pad 0, you can go to View, Align View, and Align Active Camera to View. And let me just show you. It was not showing that as an option because I was already in that view. But View, Align Active Camera to View. And you can see that that's that same Control-Alt numpad 0. And what that does is it will frame your object. Now, if you get it pretty close, but you don't have it fully positioned correctly, you can hit the G key, and you can actually, if you have the G key, if you have the mug selected and you hit the G key, it'll move the mug. But if you have the camera selected, so you can do that by actually picking this box, or you can pick it in the scene collection, you can move this, and it will move the camera. You can right click, of course, to dismiss that. Or left click to lock it in. And then there may be other ways to do this, but if you want to move a little further back, you can switch your transform orientations to local. So it's the local camera space, and then you can do GZ, and then it should allow you to sort of zoom in and out because the Z axis is the axis pointing out of the camera. So hopefully that makes sense. Once you have a good view of this, we can do a sample render, and you can go up to Render, Render Image. And by default, this is a pretty big image. It's on my machine, it's 1920 by 1080. So this will take a moment. But while that's going, let me just minimize that. What we want to do is we would like to sort of automate the process of moving this camera to view it from the side, all the way up to on top and everywhere in between, and sort of back and forth. But we don't really want it to view it from any angle, because then we'd get this sort of void, this outer space here that we don't want. We just want to have the backdrop behind it. So what we're going to build is a setup where there are a number of constraints. We're going to have an arc, that sort of a path arc that kind of makes it so that the camera goes up and down and views it from different angles. And then we're also going to have something that from the top is going to kind of loop it around like this. So while it's arcing and viewing it from different angles, it'll also be kind of going like this. And I apologize, let me switch into a better view. It'll be kind of doing this, but that's even a little bit misleading because it's actually going to be moving slightly closer and further away while we're sort of zooming in and out. So it's going to, we're just by randomly picking a spot along those two different paths, we're going to be able to create a lot of variation in our data set, at least in terms of the different views that we get, without changing the background. And I'll just mention that ordinarily, you probably would want to view this from lots of different angles and even behind it. But since we don't have a very interesting background, we haven't brought in other, like a 360 image or, a complex scenery or something like that. We just want to keep this focused on the object here so that we don't lose that backdrop. So my render is completed, and you can see sort of what this looks like. It's pretty grainy because we have a low sample count, and this is a very transparent material. And just to sort of talk about what that means, the sampling render count right here, this is how many, I don't know what the exact way to describe it is, but the way that, so the number of samples is highly correlated with how grainy the image is or how noisy the image is. If you turn that number way up, this is going to get a lot better. It's going to look a lot more realistic. But for our purposes, we don't need to make it super realistic. I think I did for my test renders like 256. But before we do that, we certainly would want to bring it down. So like 224, 224. And then we could render this with 256. And then I'm going to hit the shortcut key F12 to render this. And then you can see that it's going to render it in. It's not going to take too long because it's a small image, but it ends up, basically the higher this goes, the more realistic this is going to look. So in the next couple videos, we'll just set up our sort of camera rig to make sure that it looks at this, and then it won't be long before we're rendering out our test data set, our training data set. In this video, we're going to set up a couple of curves that we can use for our camera movement. So we're going to first view this from the front view. So I hit the number pad 1, and you can see I'm in front orthographic. We're going to create an arc first that's going to sort of follow this path so that it can view the cup from the side and then all the way up to on top. So to do that, we're going to add a curve, and we're going to choose path. And this path is really big right now, so we need to scroll out and then go tab to get into edit mode. And then we want to move each individual point so that it creates a curve. So click on the one on the far right, hit G, and then move it so that it's a little bit to the left of the center line of the cup and above it. Then select the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then the last one, and just kind of get them in there. Doesn't need to be perfect. Then we can look at this closer in, and I'm going to go back in the front view, and I'm just going to move a couple points to get them kind of where I want them to be. Something like this. So that we can have our camera going from about this center point so that it's viewing it from the side to almost straight down. Once it looks about right, you can hit tab. And now we are back in object mode. But this is not following the diagonal like we might want. So let's go ahead and rotate this. We're going to go back into object mode so that our rotation is applied to this curve inside of the object. So go ahead and hit A to select all of the points. Hit 7 on the number pad to see it from the top. And then let's make sure we're in global and then 3D cursor. And now it's going to rotate this around the 3D cursor when we hit the R key. And we can rotate this by -4.5. So I typed in -4.5 and then hit enter. And now this is rotated such that the camera will follow this curve. I just tabbed out of edit mode when we're sort of in the right when we set up the rest of our constraints. So let's view this from the top again. And let's just move our camera to make sure that this looks about right. So we're going to say G, and we're going to set it on this curve. And then we can view it from the front again, and we can do G and move it so that it's on this curve. And now when you look at it, you can see that it's pretty close to where we want it to be. And we can just view this from the camera's main view, and you can see that this is about right. As long as the camera were set to point directly at this, then it would be okay. And I think if we do R with the camera selected, oh, that's not good. It's still set to rotate around this. We're not going to do R. So this camera, we will have it set to automatically point at this object, so that won't be a problem. But we've got this path, and it's kind of mixed in here with the rest of the objects. So let's give it a name first of all. So we'll select the path, double click, and we will call this camera arc path. And let's put it in a new collection. So we're going to click this new collection button, and we'll call this camera. And we'll put the arc in there, and we can put the camera in there as well. So that'll just keep things organized for us. And we need to set up a couple other things. So we're going to set up one more arc in this video, and then in the next video we'll start setting up our constraints. So we need to create basically an oval shape that's about a little bit bigger than this mug, because that's what's going to make the camera sort of circle around this arc. And hopefully this will make sense once we put it all together. So we're going to go to Add, Curve, and we'll pick a NURBS circle this time, which you can see is gigantic. So we want to make this quite a bit smaller. If we tab into edit mode, you can see that all of these are selected. And it doesn't matter if we stay in the 3D cursor mode, so we'll just stay in there. And then we'll hit S and we'll scale it way down here. All right, so we would like this to follow this arc, but it would be really nice if not only did it follow the arc, but the sort of oval shape is more, it's more of an oval shape than a circle. So what we can do is select 1, 2, 3. So I did a shift select there. And then I'm going to do GX and kind of crunch this in here. And then if I tab out, you can see that this is more of an oval shape. And this will be good for using as a child of this, so that the camera follows along this while it's rotating along this. So let's just make sure this is in the camera collection, and we'll rename this to camera circle path. In this video, we're going to finish setting up our constraints. Now, having this camera directly follow this loop and then this loop directly follow this loop doesn't work super well in my experience. It's better to have containers for each of them. So we're going to create a cube container for this circle. So we're going to do add empty, and we're going to do cube. And this cube's really big. We don't want to scale it, and there's no such thing as edit mode for an empty. But if you click on this tab, you can make the size much smaller. And I think if we do 0.1, that's maybe a little big. So if we do like 0.08, that's about right to contain this oval shape. And we can rename this to circle path container. And make sure you name it exactly as I do, because we will be referencing this later from a Python script. And what we'll do is we will set this to be a child of this. So select the camera circle path, go to the constraints tab, and we're going to add a constraint. And this is a child of constraint. And what this will do is it'll make it so that as long as you select the cube, the circle path container, and then if you move this, then this moves with it. I'm going to right click and cancel that movement. But now you can see how as long as this thing moves somewhere, then this thing's going to move with it. So we will now set this to follow this path. So we're going to make sure we have this cube selected. We're going to add an object constraint, and we're going to do a follow path. And we need to select our camera arc path now. All right, so this is now going to be able to follow this arc, which is great. if you change the offset in the positive direction, it doesn't do anything. But if you go in the negative direction, it follows this path. So that's pretty cool. It's maybe weird that it goes in the negative direction, but we can work with that. And then we also want to check follow curve. And you can see that the cube is now curving along with this arc. Now, the oval is not pointed in the direction that I want it to be. So what we're going to have to do is mess with the rotation of this until it looks about right. So click on this oval, and we're going to change the rotation in the X direction to 90. And then it's almost right. Let's move the circle path container back so that the offset is set to 0 so we can see it from the top. We would like it so that the flat side is pointing toward here. So we need to select this again, and let's just try and drag this. Looks like 90 degrees in the positive, so I'll just type that in. And now we've got this oval so that if we go back to our constraints on this cube, this oval is going to be pointing toward it so that the camera will be able to follow this path. So now we need this camera to be able to follow that path. And the easiest way to do that is to create a new empty that's going to be following this circle. So we're going to add a curve, an empty. And this one, let's just make it look like a sphere. So this one is obviously way too big. So let's go in here and make this like 0.05. So that's much smaller, maybe even a little smaller than that, 0.02 maybe. And we're going to add a constraint to this. That's a follow path. And we're going to select our camera circle path. So that the offset for this one goes in the positive and the negative. It'll follow along here. So that's really helpful. We're going to make the camera be a child of this so that it will follow this path. And we don't need to say follow curve. There's no reason to do that. So this camera now needs to be a child of this. So we can add an object constraint in this tab here, child of, and we're going to select our sphere. It's called empty right now, so let's rename this to probably camera container. And you'll notice that that is not what we want. So the position is off, and we should be able to fix this just by changing the location to 0, 0, 0. And we might as well change the rotation as well. And now we've got this camera that just kind of points up like this into the sky. So not quite what we're looking for. Easy to fix. All we need to do is give it something to look at with a new constraint. So we could point it directly at this mug, but you'll notice that the mug's center position is on the floor. So what we're going to do is create a container that sort of contains this object. So I'm going to say add empty, and then I'm going to do a cube. And this one is going to be the thing that surrounds this object. So we're going to do much smaller than this, something like this. Okay. And then I'm going to view it from the side and just sort of move it up on the z-axis, GZ, to be sort of centered in the middle of this cup. And then I'll view it from probably the top. And then I'm going to move this along the y-axis, so GY, just so that it's kind of centered so that this handle gets in there too. And then if we view it from any angle, as long as we focus on this dot, then things should be okay. Now, there is one interesting issue with the way this box frames this cup. There's a handle on this, and the reason why we placed this box where it is so that we would focus in the right spot. But if the cup is rotated around Z, which is what we're intending to do, the focus of the camera is still going to end up being in the center of this cube. but this mug handle is now outside of that cube. So what we should do is make it so that this is actually a child of this, so that when we rotate it, this whole thing rotates with it. So let's just set this back to 0, the cup rotation, and we're going to select our object target cube, and we're going to add a constraint, and we'll do a child of constraint. And then we just need to pick our glass mug, and then when we rotate this, you'll see that it stays within the cube because the cube is technically a child of this cup. So now this camera, if we select the camera, just needs a new constraint that is a, let's see, track 2 constraint. And we just need to select this cube. And I haven't showed you this yet, but you can also click right here, and it's called empty right now. So that's probably worth renaming. So we can call this object target, something like that. Now, it is not currently pointing in the direction we want it. So we need to change the way that this is oriented, this camera. We need to say 2 is -z, and then up is y. And what that'll do is make it so that this is always going to look at this object. It's going to focus on this particular object right here. So now we have this whole thing set up, and let's give it a try. So if we select this container right here, this cube, then we can set the offset to up here. And if we select the camera circle path, we can set, we want the camera container here. Then we can move this along this path. So now you can see how if we just set random positions along these paths, we can create a bunch of random positions. So let's just make sure this is right. We're going to go into the camera view by hitting 0. And let's circle all the way around this and make sure that it doesn't go out of view. So you can see there is something, it's kind of out of view for just a tiny bit. So we might want to tweak this and just see if we can make this a little bit further back. And you only need to follow along with what I'm about to do if your mug is not fully in view. If it seems to be fully in view, you don't have to tweak this at all. So let's actually edit this arc right here. We're going to click on the arc, do tab, and all of these points are selected. As long as we have the 3D cursor selected, we should be able to scale it. So I'll hit S and then make it a little bit bigger. And then if I go into the camera view, now you can see this is contained. So even if let me just tab out of edit mode here, tab. If we go back into selecting this camera container, then hit the 0, 0, then it all fits. And it does look like it's a little off center, but that's because the center is over here. It's because that handle has to be in the frame as well. And then we can just make sure that the cube goes all the way up to the top. So let's go into camera view and go all the way up to the top and all the way down to the bottom. And this looks about right. So we're going to get all sorts of angles along here, all different constraints. So I know this is complicated. Hopefully this all made sense how we were setting this up. This is probably not the only way to do this, but this is one way that gives us a fair amount of control about what is being selected. In this video, we're going to talk about the script. So the script for this one is going to be very similar to what we did for the ABC dataset. I'm not going to do a complete walkthrough because I don't think it's worth the time to go through everything again. I'm just going to point out what's different about it. So find your T-Blender script file in the course resources, and then just do a Control-A, Control-C to copy the entire thing, and we're going to paste it into a new text here within Blender. Now, if you look at this, you're going to see that it looks very familiar. And the only substantial difference here, I'm going to point out first, is this randomly set camera position. And so what it does is it gets the camera container object. So that is the camera container here. So that's that little sphere that holds the camera. And I'm just going to show you, get a little bit better view on this. It sets that to a random value between 0 and 100. So what that does is it gets the constraint, the follow path constraint, and it sets the offset here to somewhere between 0 and 100. So you can see how that would generate a random position along there. Then it gets the circle path container and does basically the same thing, except it sets it to something between 0 and -100. So that's all that's really different about this. There are some other differences, which I'll point out now, but that's the fundamental difference. Randomly rotate object, I changed that so that it doesn't rotate it randomly in any direction. It only randomly rotates it around the z-axis. So if you wanted to detect whether a cup was full but upside down, I'm not sure why you would do that, because that would never happen in the real world. So it just made sense to only rotate it so that the handle was pointing in different directions. The color change is going to randomly change the hue between 0 and 0.2. So if I just select the T here and show the material, the hue is just going to be somewhere between like this red and this yellow. So that just sort of restrains the color so that we don't have like bright blue tea, which is, I suppose, possible, but it wasn't anywhere near the test images that I had. Then the saturation, I did somewhere between 0.2 and 0.8. And just to show you sort of what that looks like, you can look at this color right here. You can see 0.2 is more pale and 0.8 is more vibrant. And if I view this in the, let's see if I just switch to this mode really quick, you can see how that changes things quite a bit, whether the saturation is set here or down here. It just really makes it, it gives it quite a wide variety of different colors that it can be. And then otherwise, what it does is it just looks for the glass mug instead of the object to focus on, and it has an awareness of the different T names. You can take a look at the rest of the script, but basically what it does is it will find the cup object and it'll randomly rotate that. It'll randomly set the camera position. That was that function that we just talked about. And it'll randomly change the color of the material of the T. So it's hooked up just slightly different, but otherwise it's exactly the same. It will not hide the glass of the mug because that doesn't need to be hidden. It will just hide the different types of tea. And there is a type called empty. There's no object called empty, so it just does some special logic where if the name is empty, then it doesn't actually hide anything because there's nothing to hide. So that's what it does. And this, by default, the object renders is set to a very low number so that you don't end up getting some weird, you don't end up freezing up your Blender just after you run it, clicking play. Once you want to render a bigger data set, you just change these and increase the size. Otherwise, I already did a training data set here, and I'm realizing that I'm now overwriting what's in this folder. But I've already rendered this out, so I'll just show you kind of what it looks like. So these are empty. A full image here. This is one of the new ones, actually. This is from a previous rendering. But you can see what the results are from this. And you'll notice this is a little grainy. We can always crank this up and do a slower render that's higher quality. But just to show you, I just wanted to keep it lower quality. And just as a reminder, the way that you increase that quality is here. You can increase this render quality and you'll end up getting higher quality images. I want to point out that I have the output path set to this directory right here, so you may need to customize that for your needs. And also remind you that before you start rendering, you probably want to go to Window, Toggle System Console, so that you'll see any errors or the render status as it's running. Because if you don't do this first and you start rendering out a data set with 2,000 images in it, you're going to be waiting for a long time. And the only way you're going to be able to check the status of that is to check the output folder and see which image it's on. And that's it for the scripting. There's really not much else to it. So you can see how this method that works really well for A, B, and C can also be used to, with some modifications to set up a camera rig, can be used to create lots of different images of a real world object. Congratulations, you've reached the end of the course. I hope that this has been a really helpful but gentle introduction to creating synthetic data sets in Blender. I know that this is a really complex topic, and 3D modeling, 3D animation is like a full career path. It's multiple career paths because there are specialties within it, and AI and computer vision, that's also an entire career path. People spend their entire lives, their entire careers working on these things. So naturally, coming together and bringing these two things together, there's a lot to learn. It's pretty overwhelming. So I hope that this course has been a, sort of a gentle way to get into it, to sort of form a foundation, to get an idea of how you can use these without knowing everything there is to know about it, but still learn how to train deep learning neural networks and get some really interesting results. I'm sure you have questions. Lots of questions about how you might be able to implement, segmentation or bounding boxes or depth maps or anything like that, or how to do different, more advanced neural networks and all that stuff. The good news is all this is possible. The bad news is it's not in this course. It was just going to be way too much to fit all of this in this first introductory course, and I really didn't want to overwhelm people. So I thought that, this was a nice way to introduce us and to get us started. And then you can take this and you can apply it to your own projects. I would love to see what you end up doing with this. So, anytime one of our students reaches out to us, Kayla and I, it's so cool to just see all the creative applications and things. For our Cocoa Dataset course, people have done some really fascinating things. So please share your work. And if you really like this course, it would mean the world to us if you could share that on social media. Let your colleagues, your classmates, whomever might be interested in this know. The more you spread what we do, the more we can keep doing it. So with that, also, if you have any feedback, we'd greatly appreciate it. Feel free to, give us feedback directly, or just sort of give us a thumbs up somewhere, and we really appreciate that. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you again in the future.